How's it going?
It's going great. Thank you for being available. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, glad to do it.
I just thought, well, telling a little of your story, just talking about, what you're doing now and what you see the future of church music. So let's just start with, how did you get into choral arranging?
Yeah, I my family traveled every weekend singing gospel music across the southeast. We sang in a lot of homecomings out in rural churches. We would do two songs in the morning worship service, and the pastor would preach, and then there would be big dinner on the ground, and then people would try to stay awake as the Mauldin family sang from 2 o'clock to 3:30, and it was just a wonderful upbringing. My parents were both very musical. My dad built homes for a living, but his passion was writing songs and singing for the glory of God. And my mom played piano for our family, but she also taught piano lessons about 4 days a week in the afternoons in our home. So I was just raised, my parents loved God, and they loved me, and they loved music. And so my brother and I, that's just a pretty neat place to grow up. My dad had actually built a recording studio for some fellows in Greenville, South Carolina, and my dad produced a few records. So literally my whole life, I just remember hanging out in recording studios. So as we got older, and my brother and I both went to Furman University to get the more classical training, and he was more of a musician and not a vocalist. So he did like jazz band stuff, but I sang more and was in the Furman Singers and did more chamber chorus kind of music. And so as a singer, my ability to know the sensibilities of how to write for the vocals and for the choir, I just really had an interest in that. And I was never really I'm certainly no virtuoso on piano, but I've learned through the years that the good Lord wanted me to be limited because he wanted me to not write so far over people's heads that you have to have a college level choir or even a 300 voice First Baptist choir to be able to present the music that he had given me. He gave me a passion for writing music that every choir could sing and master. And there's a big difference in that, for a choir to take on music that's over their ability, either in terms of musicality or the range of the product, if they need to have just amazing singers to pull it off. I never wanted the choirs to be limited to that. I wanted to put heart in it, and I really have a calling to help medium to small choirs, especially, just sound better than they realized they could sound. That's when it's the best for me, when choirs say, we sang your work last Sunday, and we just sounded so much better than we thought we could possibly sound. And so God's given me that heart through the years to make especially the folks that don't have huge choirs or don't have lots of resources, just to make them sound the best they can sound.
Well, Russell, we share your calling and your passion. Out of the 300,000 churches in North America, the average church size attendance on a Sunday is 75. So,
exactly.
So, a lot of publishers write for the top 5 or 10% of the churches because that's where the big choirs, the big programs, the big money is, and we appreciate that. I mean, I go to a big church and I love it, but there's so many wonderful churches that have limited resources, and you are writing right where they are, and so we really appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, well, that's my heart and my calling.
Where did your publishing career start in terms of publishing and arranging?
Yeah, I moved to Nashville in 1986, and very shortly after that, I began to work. The first thing I ever did, I actually wrote a musical with Dave Clark. He had written a musical and was published by Benson, but they had passed on a musical concept that he had, which freed him up. So he took it to a brand new little company called Brentwood Music. And interesting, Dave, I had just started doing a little bit of work for Ed Key, and he was one of the very first to believe in me in Nashville. And so Dave Clark and I both sat in the lobby waiting for a meeting and had never met each other, and we've ended up since then becoming just dearest of friends. But we took the pieces of what the musical he had written called Meet Him at the Manger that had been rejected by Benson, and we just jumped in there together, and the leaders at Brentwood Music said, we think you two guys can maybe come up with something special here. And so they turned us loose with freedom to do it. And so we wrote that, and it was like the bestseller that they had up to that point, and it really began from there. So I worked freelance for about 30 years in Nashville, and just recently have, of course, many changes of hands of company ownership in the music industry, but now serve in an exclusive writing capacity with Capital Christian, which now has Brentwood Benson. I worked for almost all publishers for a lot of years, but it just made sense. I was actually, this is a whole nother trail of where I am. 3.5 years ago, I felt the Lord. I was on a mission trip to Japan, and I felt this still small voice from the Lord saying to me that in this season, when I was not too young and I wasn't too old, but I have a lot of experience, but still have some energy, that the good Lord wanted me to serve as a shepherd as well in a pastoral role. So I've gone back to seminary, and this summer I will graduate with a master's in religion from Lee University. And I was ordained 2.5 years ago, so I'm now serving as associate pastor at Seats Church in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. It's a church plant, and so I'm just learning so much about shepherding and pastoring and preaching. It's very interesting. Sunday, they've asked me to preach the Palm Sunday sermon, and while I haven't preached the Palm Sunday message very often from a sermon standpoint, I've told that story about 50 times in musicals because particularly for an Easter musical, the Palm, the triumphal entry moment is your chance to have just a big celebration. The blessed is he, and it's just this up-tempo, often a 6/8 something, because we know that we're just about to dive down into the violent days after that and leading to the cross. So it's been very interesting. The flow for it came very quickly, even though I haven't preached the message much. I sure know this story well because I've told it about every way you could try to tell the Palm Sunday story. But those are the kind of insights the good Lord has given me. Even though I'm coming at the pastoral side of it later in life, he has given me exactly what I need, just as I need it, and he has proven himself faithful on a weekly basis.
Wow, Russell, that's a great update about what's been going on in your life and in your ministry. Yeah. So let me ask you about where you see choral music in the church today and where you see it going in the next 5 to 10 years.
There have always been shifts in, from an industry standpoint, and as well as anyone that turning art into commerce, they're just really strange bedfellows, and it's always a moving target and a very difficult thing to do. I know the pendulum has swung for a good while, particularly in the evangelical church, away from organized choirs, and many of the churches that are growing the fastest and the biggest, they started in a high school auditorium, and there was not this 1 week that they're like, okay, we're a big enough church now that we need to do away with our praise team and worship leader and start a choir. They just keep on growing, and they might be 3,000 people, and they still don't have what we would call a classical setting for a choir. But with that, I believe that there will always be a love for the hymns, and there will always be a love for choral music, and I do sense it coming back. I sense even some churches that have gone to even trying to be conscious of the multi-generational settings that we have in our church. It doesn't have to be a conflict, and it doesn't have to be that, okay, we'll just have a traditional service and we'll have a contemporary service. I believe there's a heart even among the postmodern, the millennials, and the teenagers that are coming along now that have had iPhones as long as they can remember. There is a cherishing of the things that are traditional that is coming back, and I think with that will be the liturgy, and also I believe there'll be a new reverence for choral singing. So I mean, we've all kind of taken our lumps of seeing decreased sales over the last 10 years, but I just have a faith that God still works through corporate worship led by a choir, and to get the choir to be worship leaders. I just think there's value in that, and I think the Lord is going to always bless that. And I embrace whatever is bringing people to church and to the Lord. So it's not like I'm anti-modern worship music. On the contrary, but I do believe there will always be a place for choir in the church, and I hope to write for the choir, as long as I live. I would love to write music on the last day I'm on earth, if the good Lord will allow it.
Well, I appreciate your orientation toward the both and instead of either or, and
Right.
and that's one of our core tenets, is that the diversity of the body of Christ is it's a beautiful, wonderful thing, and so the diversity of expression, especially multi-generational and multicultural, is something that we're really gonna get used to in heaven. So it's not a bad idea to dip in our toe in that water right now. So, but is there anything else that you would want to just say in closing?
I just want to encourage people. I mean, that has been my realization since day one. I just kept hearing, people getting run over by Sundays coming at such a pace. It's coming one day a week, whether we are ready or not. And I just want to encourage them in doing work well and doing good works. Just don't get discouraged, because God sees the effort, and we are to give him just our excellence. We are to make his praise glorious. So even though it seems like there are times that you're not winning a lot of times in a row, or that you're weary, just be encouraged, because you are making a difference in people's lives, and it won't be until heaven till much of what is done by good folks is recognized. But just keep on moving forward. Don't let the enemy discourage, and let's just continue to work together for the kingdom.